May 31st, 1916. The North Sea, off the Jutland coast, late afternoon. HMS Warspite is circling, not by choice. A shell hit the port wing engine room and jammed her steering gear mid-turn. Her helm is locked. She can't straighten out. She can't stop safely. She is describing wide, helpless circles in front of the German high seas fleet, and every gun that can bear is firing at her. Her rangefinders are gone. Her fire control station is gone. 3 of her 4 gun turrets have fallen silent. In the one turret still fighting, a turret running on local control, a young sub-lieutenant named Herbert Packer is getting off salvos by hand, watching them fall short, refusing to stop. Captain Edward Phillpotts has made a decision. A stopped ship in the middle of Jutland is a dead ship. He keeps her moving. 2 full circles under the combined fire of the German high seas fleet. She absorbed at least 13 shell hits that afternoon. 14 men died. She never sank. That was the beginning, not the worst of it, the beginning. To understand what kind of ship does that, you need to go back to an Admiralty office in 1912, and a decision that was either a stroke of brilliance or a calculated gamble, depending entirely on how it came out. HMS Warspite was laid down at Devonport Royal Dockyard on 31st October 1912, launched 26th November 1913. She was one of 5 Queen Elizabeth-class battleships built under the 1912-13 naval estimates, and the class was a simultaneous revolution in 3 separate areas: the guns, the engines, the speed. Previous British dreadnoughts carried 13.5-inch guns. The Queen Elizabeths would mount the BL 15-inch Mark I, 8 of them, in 4 twin turrets designated A, B, X and Y from bow to stern. The 15-inch shell weighed 1,950 pounds. At the ranges battleships fought, that difference in shell weight wasn't arithmetic, it was categorical. Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty since 1911, approved that calibre before a 15-inch prototype had been successfully tested in combat conditions. He approved it based on projections and early range trials, with a prototype mounted at the Whale Island Gunnery School. On February 15, 1915, Churchill stood in Parliament and told members that the 13.5-inch gun, which he just described as unequalled by any weapon yet brought on the scene, was already being superseded by the 15-inch weapons he'd had fitted into 5 capital ships. He had staked a generation of British battleships on an untested calibre because the numbers were compelling enough to justify the risk. The second revolution was fuel. The Queen Elizabeths ran on oil rather than coal, a strategic vulnerability that Churchill and Admiral Jackie Fisher acknowledged openly. Every gallon came from thousands of miles away. They accepted that dependency because oil gave Warspite 24 knots on more than 32,000 tons of displacement. Her waterline belt was 13 inches of Krupp cemented armour. Her gun turrets carried 11 to 13 inches. The barbettes supporting them ranged from 7 to 10 inches thick. She was armoured against the weapons of her era, powered to outrun anything she couldn't fight. Churchill was present at her gunnery trials after she commissioned on March 8, 1915. He watched the 15-inch guns fire. He was, in the recorded phrase, suitably impressed. She carried 1,025 officers and ratings when she first joined the Grand Fleet. On her crest, a motto in Latin: Belli dura despicio, I despise the hardships of war. That motto was about to be tested. Back to Jutland. The 5th Battle Squadron, 4 Queen Elizabeth-class ships, Warspite among them, was operating with Vice Admiral Beatty's force when the battle reached its critical moment. They had already been in action. Warspite had scored her first confirmed hit of the battle against the German battlecruiser Von der Tann. The squadron had been exchanging fire with both Hipper's battlecruisers and the leading ships of Scheer's main battle line for the better part of an hour. When the order came to turn north and join the main Grand Fleet, the turn had to be made under fire from the closing German line. Warspite attempted it. The shell hit the port wing engine room and locked her helm. What followed was recorded in the official damage report with clinical understatement. Damage sustained by this ship was principally from gunfire, several large shells striking and penetrating into the ship. That phrasing covers at least 13 individual hits, in which specific consequences are documented. A 12-inch shell penetrating under a 15-inch gun turret, another punching through the captain's cabin and detonating in the captain's pantry. The escape trunk to the steering compartment damaged and admitting water. Each hit arriving while the ship was going round and round in front of the people firing them. Phillpotts' decision to keep her moving was tactically correct. A stopped battleship directly in the path of Scheer's line would have died faster. And his circling, whatever its intent, produced a consequence he hadn't planned. The armoured cruiser HMS Warrior was nearby, crippled after attacking the German line, dead in the water, completely exposed. Without Warspite's uncontrolled performance consuming the attention of every German gunner in range, Warrior's end would have been immediate. Warrior's crew, watching Warspite absorb the punishment meant for them, later believed it had been deliberate, that Phillpotts had circled at sacrifice to shield their ship. He hadn't planned it. The steering gear had made the decision, and it had somehow been the right one. When control was eventually recovered and the ship's course corrected, the correction briefly pushed her back toward the German fleet. Only a turret was still able to fire. Sub-Lieutenant Herbert Packer was at its controls under local command, putting off 12 salvos, all falling short, the gun firing long after every fire control system on the ship had been destroyed. Packer was later promoted specifically for those 12 salvos. Rear Admiral Evan Thomas ordered Warspite back to Rosyth. She crossed the North Sea with German U-boats in pursuit. 3 torpedoes fired, 3 missed. She arrived at Rosyth on the 1st of June. 2 months of repairs. 14 men killed, 16 wounded. Among them, Warrant Officer Walter Yeo, who subsequently became one of the first patients in the world to receive facial reconstruction via plastic surgery. A shell splinter from Jutland became a peculiar footnote in medical history. Admiral Jellicoe mentioned Warspite in his official dispatch for her role at a critical time. The official post-battle assessment noted that her steering gear would be plagued with steering irregularities for the rest of her naval career. Jutland had planted something in the hull that no dockyard could fully remove. She would carry that gremlin for 30 years. The interwar period added its own damage. She grounded on an uncharted rock in the Aegean in 1927 under Captain James Somerville. In 1933, a Romanian passenger ship rammed her in fog off Portugal. She'd collided with sister ship Barham twice. A boiler room fire in 1918 had cost her 4 months in dock. The pattern is consistent. A ship that attracted catastrophe at a rate that would have finished most vessels and kept returning to service. From March 1934, she underwent a complete reconstruction at Portsmouth, costing £2,363,000, effectively producing a new warship inside the original hull. The 24 original Yarrow boilers came out, replaced by 6 Admiralty 3-drum boilers housed in separate compartments. New geared Parsons turbines. 1,100 additional tons of armour, with magazine protection raised to 5 inches and machinery spaces to 3.5 inches. The 4 15-inch turrets were modified to increase elevation from 20 to 30 degrees, pushing maximum range to 32,300 yards. 8 4-inch high-angle guns in 4 twin mountings were added for anti-aircraft defence. An aircraft catapult and hangar were fitted, capable of operating swordfish floatplanes. The Admiralty got what was, functionally, a new warship. They also got the same steering vulnerability. Post-reconstruction trials in 1937 found problems with propulsion machinery and steering that were attributed directly to a legacy of Jutland. 21 years after the battle, the dockyard was still finding its fingerprints. She recommissioned under Captain Victor Crutchley, V.C., in 1937. On June 6, 1939, Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham hoisted his flag in Warspite at Alexandria. She became his Mediterranean Fleet flagship. Cunningham, ABC to his crews, relentless, exacting, would come to call her his grand old lady. It was affectionate and accurate simultaneously. 24 years old, rebuilt once, scarred from Jutland, carrying 20 years of accumulated repair history. Already old in institutional terms. He chose her anyway. There was something about Warspite that Cunningham trusted in a way that newer ships hadn't yet earned. The first 2 years of war weren't a story of an aging ship soldiering on. They were a demonstration of what she could still do when properly handled. Narvik, April 13, 1940. Warspite led 9 destroyers into Ofot Fjord on the Norwegian coast. 8 German destroyers were trapped there, out of fuel, out of ammunition, cornered in a fjord. The operation destroyed all 8 of them. Germany had committed 10 destroyers to the original Narvik operation across both engagements. After the second battle, all 10 were gone. Half of Germany's entire destroyer force at the war's beginning eliminated. One detail from that battle deserves its own sentence. One of Warspite's embarked swordfish floatplanes scouted ahead during the approach into the fjord and spotted U-64, a German submarine lying submerged in the water. The crew bombed it. They sank it. It was the first U-boat destroyed by an aircraft in the Second World War, accomplished by a single biplane floatplane off a 25-year-old battleship in a Norwegian fjord in April 1940. Calabria, July 9, 1940. The Italian fleet was at sea with the battleship Giulio Cesare as flagship. At exactly 15:59 that afternoon, one of Warspite's 15-inch shells struck Cesare's rear deck at a range of 26,000 yards, 24 kilometers. The shell detonated, stored 37mm anti-aircraft ammunition in a secondary explosion that forced evacuation of the engine room and cut the flagship's speed from 28 to 18 knots. The Italian fleet turned away. It was one of the longest confirmed naval gunfire hits in history. A moving warship hitting a moving warship at 24 kilometers. The elevated turret angles installed during the 1934-37 reconstruction had pushed her guns to ranges no previous British battleship could have managed. Cunningham was on Warspite's bridge when the shell landed. Cape Matapan, 27th to 29th March 1941. Ultra Signals intelligence gave Cunningham advanced knowledge of Italian fleet movements. He positioned Warspite, Valiant and Barham to intercept. The main night action lasted under 5 minutes. 3 British battleships closed to 3,800 yards, point-blank range for their main armament, and delivered coordinated broadsides against Italian heavy cruisers caught without warning in the dark. The cruisers Fiume, Zara and Pola were sunk. 2 destroyers went with them. 2,300 Italians were killed. The British lost 3 men and 1 aircraft. Cunningham wrote afterward that he had never in his whole life experienced a more thrilling moment. He was watching a ship conceived in 1912, built on an untested caliber, watching Churchill's gamble pay out at 3,800 yards in the Mediterranean night. Then came Crete, and everything changed. May 1941. The Luftwaffe had achieved air dominance over the waters around Crete, and the Royal Navy was paying for it every day. HMS Gloucester, HMS Fiji, HMS Greyhound, ships sunk or crippled by unrelenting air attack as they covered the evacuation of Allied forces from the island. Warspite was operating west of Crete under Rear Admiral Rawlings, running the same gauntlet. On May 22nd, a 500-pound German bomb struck her starboard midships area. It destroyed the starboard 4-inch and 6-inch battery installations and tore the ship's side open. The official British assessment of the airborne invasion of Crete stated that Warspite had suffered 1 direct hit on her starboard midship, presumably a 500-pound type, and judged casualties small, because the bomb had not fully detonated inside the hull. Other accounts put the death toll at approximately 38 men, a figure that conflicts with the official assessment and can't be reconciled from available records. What nobody disputed was the structural damage. The starboard batteries were gone, and the ship wasn't repairable in any available theatre. The decision was made to send her to America. Warspite was repaired at Puget Sound Navy Yard in Bremerton, Washington. An American facility, American workers. Photographs from the period show U.S. shipyard hands covering her decks under arrangements made possible by Lend-Lease. The repairs took approximately 6 months. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor while she was still in that American yard in December 1941. The United States entered the war around a battered British battleship being patched together in Washington state. She returned to the Indian Ocean in early 1942, rejoined the Mediterranean in 1943. Crete patched, Jutland still unrectified. Rebuilt once, cross-Atlantic repaired once, and heading back into the theatre, where the Luftwaffe was now deploying something that made the 500-pound bomb at Crete look manageable. September 16th, 1943. Off Salerno, Italy. 2:25 in the afternoon. The weapon aimed at Warspite was the Ruhrstahl SD-1400X, the Fritz X. Developed from 1939 by Dr. Max Kramer at the Luftwaffe's research establishment in Berlin-Adlershof, guidance came from the Kehl-Strasbourg radio control system. The pilot held the Dornier DO-217K2 steady, while a second crew member tracked the bomb's tail flare visually and steered it toward the target via joystick. Both men had to hold that exposure while the target's anti-aircraft fire came up at them. Among the first precision-guided weapons ever deployed in combat, it was built specifically to destroy armoured warships. 7 days before it hit Warspite, 2 Fritz X strikes had sent the Italian battleship Roma, 46,000 tons, the pride of the Regia Marina, to the bottom in under 18 minutes. Roma took 1,352 men with her. The unit operating this weapon was the third of KG-100, flying out of northern Italy. They had flown 6 daytime missions against Allied shipping during the Salerno campaign before the 16th. USS Savannah hit September 11th, 197 Americans killed. HMS Uganda hit September 13th. The weapon performed exactly as designed. 3 DO-217s approached Warspite that afternoon. 1 bomb was aimed. It entered through the upper deck, passed through 6 separate decks without detonating, and exploded in the reserve feed tank below the No. 4 boiler room. The blast extinguished every boiler fire simultaneously and blew the double bottom out. A second Fritz X near missed at the waterline, punching a second hull breach. 5,000 tons of seawater began pouring in. The ship settled 5 degrees to starboard. No steam, no propulsion, no steering, no power to the pumps. Warspite, Cunningham's grand old lady, the ship that had circled under fire at Jutland, that had hit Cesare from 24 kilometres, that had helped destroy 3 Italian cruisers in 5 minutes at Matapan, was adrift and helpless in the Tyrrhenian Sea. The commanding officer was Captain Packer. Not just any Captain Packer. This was Herbert Packer, the same sub-lieutenant who, in 1916, had kept a turret firing manually during those 2 helpless Jutland circles and been promoted for it. He had risen through the Navy over 27 years and come back to the same ship as her commanding officer. And now the same ship was trying to die around him for the second time. His crew had nothing powered. The damage control that followed was entirely manual. Men in flooding compartments, in damaged spaces, in the dark, working each valve and hatch and watertight boundary by hand. They worked compartment by compartment. They sealed what could be sealed and absorbed the losses where nothing could be done. The flooding slowed. The list stabilized. 5 degrees to starboard, 5,000 extra tons of ballast she'd never asked for, but afloat. Packer received a mention in dispatches. The official recognition noted it was the second time he had limped into port on board a heavily damaged Warspite. The first time had been at Jutland in 1916. He had spent his career on the same ship and kept it alive through both. She reached Malta under tow on the 19th of September, 3 days after the strike, still carrying that water, still listing 5 degrees, but floating. From Malta, she was towed to Gibraltar on the 12th of November. From Gibraltar, she eventually reached Rosyth in March 1944. The damage assessment there was definitive. X turret, the third of her 4 main gun positions, couldn't be repaired. Permanently disabled, removed from the order of battle for the rest of the ship's service life. The 6-inch secondary guns came off. And over the hole the Fritz X had blown through the hull bottom, the Rosyth dockyard applied a concrete caisson, a structural concrete patch sealed over the wound. When Warspite eventually sailed again, that patch was visible on her hull. Concrete covering a Fritz X wound on a Royal Navy battleship headed back to war. She departed Greenock on June 2, 1944, with 6 operational 15-inch guns, 1 permanently dead turret, and concrete where a guided bomb had found her. She was heading to Normandy. Bombardment Force D, Eastern Task Force, Sword Beach Sector. That was her assignment for the morning of June 6, 1944. At approximately 5 o'clock, HMS Warspite opened fire on the Villaville Battery, a German coastal gun installation covering the eastern approaches to the Normandy landing zone at a range of 26,000 yards. She was the first battleship to fire in the Normandy naval bombardment. 26,000 yards, the same number at which she had struck Giulio Cesare in July 1940. Every gun crew aboard knew that figure. A crew member whose account was preserved through the BBC's wartime archive described being called to action stations around 5:45 and being told their target was an important gun battery above Trouville. Men who had already survived Crete or Salerno in a ship that bore the physical marks of both were about to fire the opening rounds of the liberation of Western Europe. In the first 48 hours of the Normandy operation, Warspite fired over 300 rounds of 15-inch shells at German positions. On June 9th alone, she put 96 more 15-inch rounds into targets ashore in a sustained afternoon bombardment. She continued in that role along the Normandy coast through the summer. The Wikipedia entry on Warspite carries one sentence that contains the entire argument of this story. The ship bombarded German positions during the Normandy landings and on Walcheren Island in 1944, despite not being fully repaired. A concrete patched hull, a permanently dead turret, the same steering that had jammed at Jutland in 1916, leading the naval fire support of the most consequential amphibious assault in history. After D-Day, she struck a magnetic mine while proceeding to Rosyth to change gun barrels. Returned to service. In November 1944, she joined the bombardment of the German fortifications on Walcheren Island, supporting the Allied operation to clear the Scheldt estuary and open the port of Antwerp to the supply columns moving through Belgium. She was still working, still in the line. She was decommissioned 1st February 1945. The war in Europe ended 4 months later. In April 1947, the Admiralty formally struck HMS Warspite from the naval list. The decision to sell her for scrapping had been made. Metal Industries of Faslane, Scotland, purchased her. The plan was to tow her north from Portsmouth, dismantle her at the yard, recover the steel. 2 tugs. A straightforward operation. Towing commenced 8th April 1947. A storm came up in the English Channel. Her tow lines broke. What happened next has a single, clean version in the historical record. HMS Warspite broke free during the storm and ran aground at Prussia Cove on the Cornish coast. The cove had been, as one contemporary account put it, for the most part unheard of before that April. The salvage crews couldn't refloat her. They dismantled her where she lay. The work took years. She was cut down almost to the waterline on a Cornish beach in sight of the Atlantic. Some structural remains persist at the site today. She was 34 years old. She had been hit at least 13 times at Jutland and survived on steering that never worked properly again. She had been bombed at Crete and sent to America. She had been struck by one of the world's first precision-guided anti-ship weapons off Salerno, had taken 5,000 tons of seawater with no power, and had floated through 3 days of dead towing before making Malta. She had fired the opening shots of D-Day, with concrete patching the wound from Salerno and 2 guns she would never fire again. When the men with the cutting torches finally came for her, she put herself on a rock in Cornwall and made them come to her. Belli dura despizio. I despise the hardships of war. In the Royal Navy's battle honours system, a ship earns a formal commendation for each engagement in which it served with distinction. These aren't awarded for participation alone, they represent recognition of consequential action. HMS Warspite holds more of them than any individual warship in the history of the Royal Navy. 15. Jutland, 1916. Atlantic, 1939. Narvik, 1940. Calabria, 1940. Mediterranean, 1940. Matapan, 1941. Greece, 1941. Crete, 1941. Malta convoys, 1941. Sicily, 1943. Salerno, 1943. Normandy, 1944. Walcheren, 1944. 15 honours across 30 years and 2 world wars. Each one a different way the sea tried to deliver a verdict. Each one refused. If stories like this are why you're here, subscribe. There are more of them.